I have never supported sequestration. I always thought that was a big mistake. These are across-the-board, mindless cuts that says that every priority in government is identical to the other. That's not the case. If you had a problem with your family budget and you had to reduce some spending and you had money put aside for your mortgage payment, your rent payment, or your family food budget, and maybe some money for a weekend trip, you wouldn't cut every category identical. You may give up that weekend trip in order to be able to save the roof over your family's home or put food on the table. Well, sequestration says that every priority in government is the same. It's also not directed to where we really need to do to reduce the deficit. Once again, sequestration applies to discretionary spending primarily. It provides a fourth round of cuts. We've already had cuts over the last 3 years. And for the agencies that are affected, it's equivalent to about a 10% cut. Well, you can't do that without seriously affecting the mission of the agencies. And that is just wrong. And that's why I have said from the beginning, let's replace sequestration. Well, March 1st came, sequestration came, people woke up the next day and said, what's the big deal? Well, we're finding out what the big deal is all about. We just heard from the budget of the FAA, the air traffic controllers, that because of sequestration, they have very little option. 85% of their operational budgets and personnel, and air traffic controllers are most of the personnel. So therefore, they've announced that they have to furlough 11 days during the remainder of this fiscal year, and that comes out to about 1 furlough day over each work period. It's as much as a 10% reduction in the workforce to man our towers to make sure that air traffic is managed safely. Well, you can't do that with that type of reduction, and we're now looking at whether there's going to be significant delays in flights. That is ridiculous, those types of cuts. We know better than that. These aren't the type of things that's going to hurt our economy, no question about it, if we can't have reliable air traffic service. But I could go through a whole list of things. I was talking to one of the nonprofits in Maryland that manages a Head Start program, and they were telling me about what the fall enrollment's going to be. They have a waiting list, Mr. President. They have a waiting list of people of families that want their children in Head Start, that qualify for Head Start, and they're not going to be able to get into a Head Start program. Why? Because of sequestration. The waiting list will get longer. Children will be denied the ability to go to Head Start program. Did we really intend that? I don't think so. I don't think our colleagues wanted to say that we were going to balance our budgets on the backs of children being denied Head Start placements. I was at NIH, National Institutes of Health, not too long ago. The research they do is so critically important to our country's future. It's not only the fact that they are discovering the answers to dread diseases or ways in which we can keep people healthy. They're now working on developing a universal flu vaccine against the influenza, so you don't have to get one every year. Think about how many lives that could save. But it's also the basic research we need in order to create the jobs in the bioscience areas, in the tech areas. This is about creating more jobs in our community. And now they're going to give out less grants as a result of sequestration, even though today they're only approving about 1 out of every 7 worthwhile grant applications. We certainly didn't intend that through sequestration. Or I could talk about new transit starts. We have some very exciting programs in Baltimore and Washington and Maryland. A Purple Line to provide transit between the Washington suburban counties in Maryland. We have transit programs in Baltimore. We have the Carter cities along the 270 corridor. We have Southern Maryland that needs help. All these programs need to compete for a limited amount of funds. Now, because of sequestration, there's going to be less funds available, meaning that we're going to have more traffic jams rather than less. Do we really mean for that to happen? I could go on and on and on. I could talk about the cuts from Department of Defense and what they have to go through. These weren't cuts that we initiated saying that this program needs to be reduced. These aren't the type of deliberative actions that a Congress would do. It's just saying we're going to do a meat axe approach and tell the agency, you cut your programs by this percentage amount. As I said, we advertised it a little over 5%. But in reality, it's much higher than that because these cuts were over a 7-month period. They really reflect a year reductions. So the cuts are even more severe when used on an annual basis. Our federal workforce deserves more. These are people working hard to perform the vital services in our country, whether it's protecting our borders or doing the research or keeping our food supply safe or making sure our seniors get Social Security checks, and the list goes on and on. It's not fair to those who signed up to serve the public as federal workers. And it's certainly not fair to our economy. This is having very damaging impact on the economy of this country. We've already seen in the most recent job reports a slowdown than what we predicted, and most economists say it's directly related to these sequestration across-the-board cuts. So, Mr. President, what should we do? We're in session. It's time for us to act. We're in FY13. That's the budget year that we're in right now. And yes, we passed a budget for FY13 at the end of last year. Actually, I think it was on January 1st when we finally got around to passing it. We passed that. We passed it at the sequestration levels, saying that we hoped that we would figure out a budget plan to avoid the sequestration cuts in this year. So let us consider a way to avoid these mindless across-the-board cuts and substitute it for sensible reductions that we know will not have the same type of unintended consequences on services that are vitally important to our economy and to the people of this country. There are areas that we have savings. We know that. We have that in the overseas contingency accounts under Department of Defense. We know we can find savings in tax expenditures. We spend $1.2 trillion a year in tax expenditures. We know we can certainly find some savings on tax expenditures. I think we got to look at a broader level than just these discretionary spending accounts that are particularly devastated by these sequestration cuts. So I would urge this body to find a way that we can replace sequestration for FY13, this current fiscal year, by a more responsible budget savings, and then working through our Appropriation Committee, working through the Budget Committee and the other committees for FY14, have time under a more normal legislative process to figure out our spending priorities that go beyond just the appropriated dollars, what we do in the tax code, what we do on the mandatory spending. Let's bring up that game plan for FY14, next fiscal year that begins October 1. But for the current situation, let's replace sequestration with a more sensible way to get those savings rather than causing the harm, whether it's to those who depend upon air traffic, those who depend upon a place at Head Start, those who rely upon the research done at NIH, whether those who depend upon having adequate support within our military. All of the above are adversely affected by sequestration. It's time for us to take action, to do what we were supposed to do. Make the tough decisions. Don't take the way out that every program in government is of equal importance.